Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Appraisal Buzzcast. We appreciate all the great feedback and the new subscribers we've been getting. Today, we'll be speaking with Joan Trice, CEO of Allterra Group, and Bridget Berg of Corelogic to discuss everyone's favorite dirty laundry, mortgage fraud in the appraisal industry. We'll be discussing an increase in fraud, the current market, how it's happening, and what can be done to stop it. Joan, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome, Bridget. Yeah, oddly enough, I really like talking about this topic. I think, one, because it gets me so irritated when people try to cheat the system and ruin things for good people. So I've seen some of your reporting lately from coming out of Corelogic, and it says that mortgage fraud is rising again. What's going on?
Hi, Joan. So during the pandemic, we do quarterly measurements of where the fraud risk is at any given point in time. And 1 year ago, at second quarter 2020, we were at a low point, kind of a historic low point, because during the pandemic, the interest rates went down, everyone was refinancing, and the majority of the transactions coming through were rate term refinances. Very low risk, no new money. And so we had a big dip back then. If we go back pre-pandemic to 2 years ago, we're roughly at the same level we were in mid-2019. So the increase in mortgage fraud is probably a return to pre-pandemic levels of fraud risk, kind of readjusting from the big glut of rate term refinances that were really low risk.
When you say mortgage fraud, what kind of flavor of mortgage fraud? Are there various kinds? I mean, is it title? Is it appraisal?
There are so many ways, because you're talking about a lot of money, you're talking about real estate, and people are always going to find a way to cheat the system if there's anything to be had there. But the mortgage fraud that we're measuring in this index is really focused around the fraud on loan originations. So back in, say, 2010, 2011, we were seeing a lot of fraud around short sales, the real estate owned and servicing and things like that. This measurement, that's pretty low right now because there's not a lot of foreclosures out there. There's not a lot of short sales. We have a really healthy real estate market right now. The fraud that we measure, and the one that we're most concerned with right now, is more around the information used to obtain that initial financing. So a lot around borrower qualifications, the terms of the transaction, who's getting the money, where did the money come from, who's getting it, as well as obviously the sale price, which is really important.
Right. Okay. Well, let's do this, Bridget. Let's break for a commercial message, and then we'll be right back. And I have some more questions for you.
Appraisers, in uncertain times, you need a certain partner. You don't have to sacrifice top-notch coverage for an affordable premium. Intercorp has all the options and is sure to have just the right one to fit your specific needs. They provide the appraisal profession with competitive, best-in-class E&O coverage solutions nationwide. Having served the insurance needs of the industry for more than 25 years, Intercorp understands the risks you face every day. Whether you're an individual appraiser, appraisal firm, residential or commercial, or an AMC, visit intercorpinc.net to get a competitive quote today. Joan, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. So, Bridget, when you contrast the mortgage crisis from 10 years ago, where there was lots of fraud, how has it changed? And then kind of prognosticate, if you can, what flavor you think they're going to take when and if this market turns.
Oh, that's a great question, Joan. So during the financial crisis, in that run-up, we had really, really uncontrolled markets. We had a very, very high percentage of things that were originated by third parties. There was no NMLS, that SAFE Act that came about after the financial crisis, ties loan officers to transactions. During the run-up to the financial crisis and during it, you couldn't really tell who was the loan officer on a particular loan. And that's not the case anymore. All the loan officers, we had dual employment and things like that. that was huge. Another big thing, the Dodd-Frank Act with the ability to repay, and basically you can't easily get a no income loan. You do need to show that you can qualify for the loan. But I think one of the biggest changes since that's going to prevent something ever the scale of what we saw 10 years ago is the UCDP. So back 10, 15 years ago, if an appraiser gave a lender an appraisal, it pretty much existed as an image or a piece of paper. They didn't have the data. And so when you were investigating fraud and you were trying to catch an appraiser being inconsistent, it meant opening up tons and tons of files and copying out information from documents and trying to find, oh, this appraiser was inconsistent. Very, very time consuming, very easy for appraisers to get away with things. There was a lot of appraiser identity theft and things like that. Now that everything is in the portal, now that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have that ability to cross-reference, that has changed the game. So I don't think it's, the few people who were taking advantage of that have been kind of shut out for the most part from that. And I think that is probably the biggest thing that I've seen that's going to, change. So now the fraud's going to be probably less around, extreme inflated values and more around, smaller opportunities for manipulated markets or uncertain markets where you've got some, neighborhoods in transition where you can buy low and sell high, but it's going to be less about just the out and out appraisal fraud we saw in some cases 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, some of the feedback that I'm getting from both lenders and appraisal management companies is that appraisers who get engaged for the assignment are not actually the ones going out to inspect the property, that they're sending a runner. And there was a big case, I think, that recently unfolded with the GSEs on that. And they were able to catch him, as you said, by UCDP. You can't possibly inspect a property in Cleveland, Ohio, and run down to Newport, Kentucky, and do, 5 or 6 there all in the same day. So at the end, it was UCDP, and being able to catch them that way just wasn't humanly possible to do it. So yeah, I hope they do use UCDP as a weapon to stamp out fraud. That would be amazing going forward. So I do have a question for you though. Have you seen any fraud around the waiver program? Or is it too soon to tell? Or are these things that, don't show up for years later?
We haven't seen any fraud around the waiver, and you're probably right. It may be too soon to tell. And because we're in a healthy market with low supply, high demand, even if there is a fraud, home prices have risen. And so sometimes it gets covered up. Sometimes it doesn't become material. The loan performs, it refinances, it pays off, it's essentially laundered and no one knows.
Right. Right. Yeah. But when the tide goes out, as we learned 10 years ago, yeah, you suddenly see everybody standing there naked. And
it's really a matter of like the stress test. You know how they put banks through a stress test?
Right.
And
right.
It's the same thing. We're flying pretty happy right now because there is not much stress on the lending market. And yeah, that's when all of those weaknesses show up, is in the tough times. And so if, I think we're in a long-term situation for the next couple of years of a shortage of housing. And so nationally, I don't think we're going to see a big turn. We may see some in some local markets as we have these people who've migrated, and we've had a lot of migration.
Yes.
And so that's impacted like supply and demand in markets. And if that turns, how much remote work is going to be allowed in the future? Are there going to be some communities that are going to be hit with, people leaving, the migrants leaving
Right.
those communities. And that's probably where we'll see more of those types of things is going to be in small local areas where it's not the same as the healthy national level that we see
Right.
stress in the local
Yeah,
area.
it'll be in pockets. All right, Jim, you have a message for us?
Thanks, Joan. Stuck in the appraisal management technology dark ages, using spreadsheets or antiquated software, you should meet Evo. Evo is the most innovative appraisal management technology on the market, trusted by lenders and AMCs, and is loaded with mind-blowing features like sophisticated decision algorithms to select the best appraiser for each order, the ability to configure forms and fields in real time, a user role-based design, and the industry's only compliance guarantee. Find out more at globaldms.com or call 877-866-2747. Back to you, Joan.
Thank you. So, Bridget, let's fast forward a little bit. You mentioned that in the last crisis, a lot of the fraud was around the servicing scenario. And if and when the moratorium is ever lifted and those in default are finally allowed to work themselves through the system, we're going to have a wave of foreclosures again. And what are you anticipating? The same old tricks, or are they going to be different this time?
I think you'll see some of the same old tricks because as people are still around, they know how to do those phony short sales to kind of get your lower mortgage amount. However, the demand right now is so strong that I don't think it's going to be as necessary because unless there's pockets, again, if those foreclosures come in pockets where we're not going to see demand, then I think we're definitely going to see those old tricks, probably not to the same extent. We haven't had as much advancement in controls on the servicing side, in my opinion, as we have on the origination side since the last financial crisis. We had the fraud in the origination. It bumped up, everybody went into foreclosure, then the fraud moved to the short sales and loan modifications. And then we've got the run up, and now we're back into qualification fraud. I don't think we've made as many advancements. So yes, I think that's possible. It's probably going to be, again, local, but smaller.
Yeah, nothing shocked me more than when I learned of the term reverse staging. That happened in the last crisis. It's like, you really have to be creative to be a fraudster. So, for those listening, what that term is if, it was oftentimes a real estate agent wants to buy a house in foreclosure. So there's not arm's length transactions between who's doing the BPO and who's actually doing the buying. You can just put it in LLCs and kind of obfuscate who the actual buyers are, but they would send out the appraiser after they put deer urine under the foundation and they pull out some wiring in every room and pull the gutters off, and the appraiser would come in and go, oh my gosh, this place is trash, it's going to cost $20,000 to $30,000 to fix it up. And 5 minutes after the appraiser leaves, the gutters are back on, the outlets are back intact, and they pull the bag of urine out from under and everything is fine, and turn around, flip it, and make $100,000 or so per property, and move on to the next. It stuns me that if you're that clever, why don't you use your skills for good and not evil? It just baffles me.
Well, very few of them got caught. Very few of them got prosecuted. And what I always think is with the creativity is a lie one way is going to be profitable sometimes, but sometimes they're the opposite of that lie, the deflation versus the inflation. Sometimes borrowers say they're going to rent out the property when they're not. Sometimes they say they're not going to rent it out when they are. So we tend to assume everybody's going to lie in a specific direction, but they don't always. And that's really important to keep in mind when you're thinking about fraud, because they could be doing, they might have just as much motivation to do the opposite of what you think.
Right. That, I think that's why it floored me so much. The pressure that had happened on appraisers prior to when everything blew up was to inflate values. So I don't even think appraisers saw it coming that, gee, who's ever going to pressure me to lower the values? So, again, the, appraiser gets manipulated either way. And it's a scary time. I was actually, Bridget, in Baltimore and had an appraisal firm there when the first flipping cases happened. So, or the illegal flipping. Not all flipping is evil, but it's very easy to do in the inner city because, on one block, a developer could be in there and the property values are going up and it's fantastic. And literally one block away, they're just bombed out shells of a building. And it's very easy just to select comps that suit whatever path you want to manipulate. And it's hard to get caught, but eventually, the house of cards comes falling down. And
just a caution for appraisers, the propensity for fraud is always going to be greatest when there is a lot of volatility. When you're in those kinds of areas where you have, a big price difference from block to block, or, you cross the street and it's a different area, or when, the supply and demand is out of balance. Right now, it looks pretty stable, and that reduces kind of the profitability of fraud, but that's always something to keep in mind. And that's a great example, Joan.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Bridget, thank you for joining us today. This has been a fascinating conversation, and appraisers, stay alert out there. Don't get caught in a trap.
When was the last time you wanted to work more for less money? The appraisal industry is headed that way. You have to do more for the same money, and now you have less time for yourself. DataMaster can change that. With their easy-to-use software, DataMaster lets you spend more time analyzing and less time typing. Plus, you get more information than the other data import products. Head to www.datamasterusa.com/buzz for more information and to learn how you can save an hour per report. Thanks, Joan and Bridget, and thank you so much for your time with us today. And thanks to our listeners for joining us. If you have an idea for a future Buzzcast or would like to be interviewed, reach out at info@appraisalbuzz.com and head over to the forums on appraisalbuzz.com and let us know how you feel about today's episode. Have a great day.